Former U.S. President Donald Trump has declared himself the victor of the U.S. presidential elections. And joining us with more reactions coming from Europe is DW correspondent Chiponda Chembulu in Berlin. Chiponda, in terms of reception from Europe, what more can we expect?
Thanks for having me. Well, for many here in Europe, a Trump victory is, of course, very disappointing, especially here in Germany. And there's two major reasons for that. There's the war in Ukraine and, of course, what future trade relations between the EU and the US could be. Now, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, Brussels has been able to count on Washington to deliver much needed military aid to Kiev as Ukraine defends itself in the war against Russia. And that is something that could change with a Trump administration. Now, Republicans have been against providing aid to Ukraine, so of course it could mean that the EU will need to step up its efforts. And that, of course, would be very expensive. And of course, there's also the prospect of tariffs. Now, Trump has said he would introduce tariffs of 20% on European goods. Now, that is, of course, something that would especially affect Germany, which is Europe's biggest economy. The US was the biggest export market for German goods last year.
So what's being done in Europe to prepare for a Trump presidency now that we know that he's in for a second term?
Well, there are reports that the EU may have also prepared potential tariffs with which the bloc could retaliate with. But of course, whether that will be effective enough remains to be seen, because during his first presidency, Trump preferred to deal with EU governments separately rather than speak with Brussels. Now, that's a strategy that he could use once again to weaken the influence that Brussels has. So a lot of how Europe responds will depend on how and whether the EU is willing to work together, or some governments prefer to negotiate with Washington on their own. And it's also important to remember that EU leaders are not being caught by surprise like they were during the first Trump presidency. They have some experience dealing with Trump already, so things could be different this time around.